She lived a life unlike any other woman in Asia. An alluring movie starlet who joined the ranks of the communists, she eventually became the wife of their leader, Mao Zedong, and the most powerful woman in China.
江青在中国历史上留下了她的名字，也留下了她的形象。
Yet she hungered for more.
Well, she was a victim, and she was a victimizer.
战争的时候，唯一留在前方追随毛泽东主席的，只有我一个女同志。
Her ultimate goal, to take her place in history as the first female leader of Communist China. This is the story of Madam Mao. (1976). China mourns the loss of its beloved communist leader, Mao Zedong. Barely a month after Mao's death, however, his wife, Jiang Qing, was arrested and put on trial. Once China's most powerful woman, Jiang Qing was charged with high treason and plotting to subvert the government. The verdict? A death sentence. This was her darkest hour. Yet Jiang Qing, better known as Madam Mao, remained defiant to the end. But life wasn't always this bleak for Madam Mao. At the pinnacle of her popularity and power, Jiang Qing was adored by millions. Her mission was to help her husband, Mao Zedong, establish a new socialist utopia for all. But this calculated move would exact a heavy price on the Chinese people. Today, according to official record, she's achieved immortality, not as Chairman Mao's wife, but as the notorious white-bone demon who led Mao and China to ruin. But just how did Jiang Qing become the most hated woman in China? Jiang Qing was born in 1914 in Shandong province, with an upbringing that was turbulent and violent.
江青说，她是生活在充满着争吵的一个家庭，所以她说自己的童年是很不幸的。
Jiang Qing had an abusive father and a defiant mother. At a lantern festival, her father hit Jiang Qing with a spade, knocking out her tooth. Incidents like this saw Jiang Qing and her mother flee from home.
这种家庭的气氛呢，也形成了江青这种性格。她的性格很像她的母亲，所以很倔强。然后呢，她也反抗。
所以她念小学的时候，老师啊就被开除过，然后她就逃出家里，就到一个戏曲学校去学京剧。
The Opera Institute awakened Jiang Qing's love for the theater and became her lifelong obsession. Then, at the tender age of 16, Jiang Qing had the first of her many marriages to a merchant, which didn't last. Jiang Qing's second marriage, however, would define her destiny. In the early 1930s, Jiang Qing made her way to the coastal town of Qingdao. Here, she met and fell in love with Yu Jiwei, a leader of the local communist underground. The Chinese communists were at war with the ruling nationalist government to establish a new China. With the help of her new husband, Jiang Qing joined the communists, giving her her first taste of political life. This second union didn't last either. Already twice married by 19, Jiang Qing decided to move on. Her next stop, the entertainment capital of China, Shanghai, where she would seek fame and fortune. Shanghai was also known as the Paris of the East for its bustling cosmopolitan atmosphere and film industry. Jiang Qing had to work as a night school teacher to make ends meet, while acting in underground left-wing plays. In 1934, Jiang Qing was arrested twice for being a communist. The details surrounding her release were sketchy. Some speculate that Jiang Qing obtained her freedom by making a secret plea bargain with her nationalist captors. Following this, Jiang Qing remained in Shanghai, but gave herself a new name. She was now known as the actress Lan Ping, or Blue Apple.
她改名叫兰平，她就是为了引起人家的注意， 因为苹果都是绿颜色的，他要改成蓝颜色的苹果。
In all, Jiang Qing would change her name 4 times throughout her life. Each change signified a new identity and a new phase of life. In 1935, Lan Ping got her big break, playing Nora in a production of A Doll's House, a role that echoed her view of the world.
A Doll's House by the Norwegian playwright Ibsen had an enormous impact on her.
最后从家里出走，他当年他也是他母亲从家里出走，所以他这种很投入，很容易理解这个角色。
She said, I must find out which is right, the world or myself.
所以第一个次演出就打响了，奠定了他在上海的艺术界的这个地位。
Jiang Qing's efforts eventually paid off as Shanghai's film studios came a-calling. She'd also caught the eye of a critic named Tang Na, who would become her 3rd husband. Billed as Lan Ping, Jiang Qing appeared in 10 movies, but mostly in supporting roles and cameos. Competition in Shanghai's movie business was tough among the many glamorous starlets.
这样的就第一流的，还有就第2流的。江青呢，他是个第3流的。从演技来说，演技还可以的。演话剧他也很刻苦。作为电影演员来说，他并不是很成功的。
Lan Ping would eventually create waves in Shanghai, not for her acting, but for her scandals with other men.
In the Shanghai of the time, all of the artists slept around, and women had to please directors. I mean, you wanted to get the leading part. And so Jiang Qing was very conscious of the fact that as a woman in the theatre and in movies, you sometimes slept with a guy.
张敏是上海很有名的导演，他想跟张敏呢有这个同居关系的，就可以有机会演重要的戏。因为张敏当时是有自己的家庭。那么当时闹得风风雨雨，因为他拆上了张敏的家庭，
还不是为了。
The fees from movie companies didn't make Jiang Qing wealthy by any means, but poverty was behind her. She had also become increasingly westernized in her tastes, adoring Hollywood films which showcase strong leading women. While Jiang Qing became a modestly successful actress, she was still far from a successful wife. In 1937, she divorced her 3rd husband, Tang Na, after just a year. Just 23 years old, Jiang Qing now cast her ambitions beyond the stage.
She said, our life is more important than our art as actresses. She didn't want to be treated as a doll. She was really using the theatre to push her life ahead.
By 1937, the nationalists were clamping down on left-wing elements in Shanghai. The city's entertainment industry was also affected.
When the Japanese were bombing Shanghai, and not only the film industry was collapsing, but life itself was getting perilous. She did have left-wing principles, and she decided she would try her artistic skills and her dramatic skills for the communist cause by joining the communists. So she tracked down communist intermediaries and she made the journey to the town of Yan'an.
Heading to the communist stronghold of Yan'an, Jiang Qing would meet Mao Zedong, the man who would transform China's destiny and her destiny as well. 1937. Jiang Qing was forced to abandon her acting career as the Japanese invaded Shanghai. She traveled to Yan'an to join the communists who were recruiting for their cause. Leading the communists was a charismatic young intellectual named Mao Zedong. No one could imagine that Jiang Qing, an aspiring movie starlet, and Mao, a guerrilla leader, were fated to change each other's lives forever. The communists had established their base in the sleepy backward town of Yan'an, and when Jiang Qing arrived there, she quickly learned that it was a different world. For one thing, she wasn't accepted as an established communist compared to the other women.
Jiang Qing, being Jiang Qing, thought she'd be welcomed and given this and given that. And of course, it wasn't quite like that. In Yan'an, the women were nearly all tough revolutionaries. Short-cut hair and clothes just like the men's. They didn't look a bit like the actress from Shanghai. And she wanted to have dancing, and they said there's no dancing here. And she had makeup and so on. So she got a bit of a shock.
Nonetheless, while waiting to enter the Communist Party school, Jiang Qing put her experience to good use and began charming various party leaders. One day, Jiang Qing joined several hundred other students for a talk by a leading comrade.
毛泽东呢就中午党校去做报告，那么江青呢坐在第一排，鼓掌也鼓得特别热烈，所以引起了毛泽东的注意。
The veterans women in Yunnan were called Amazons, and then the few who came in, like Jiang Qing, were called princesses. So the final factor was that Mao was ready for a princess.
当然，毛泽东喜欢上她，因为当时的江青应该说还是很年轻，也漂亮。江青这个人呢，他稍微注意一些，做一点打扮呢就不同于众。他的头发很乌亮，眼睛也很大。毛泽东看到他还喜欢他。
Mao Zedong was just at the right moment to take a liking to Jiang Qing. Mao Zedong's third marriage was coming apart. It wasn't Jiang Qing's fault, but months after it was clear that Mao and his third wife, Miss Hezijun, were destined for divorce.
The attraction was mutual. 21 years older than she was, Mao was the father figure that Jiang Qing never had.
你看，现在江青不仅跑到他的窑洞里去，又趁着这个要轰炸的时候，又跟着毛泽东一块儿进到他的防空洞里去了。那防空洞比任何人不能进的嘛，意思说你在里面都干什么了？说是这个江青啊，第一次跟着主席进的防空洞，第一次嘛出来了，说第二次进去嘛也出来了嘛，说第三次进去就没有出来嘛，生米已经做成熟饭了，大家就不要再议论了嘛。
Jiang Qing's affair with Mao appalled top communist officials, who feared a scandal because Mao was still married.
Mao's wife was a political figure. People felt sorry for her because she'd borne 5 children for Mao, and she was a proved revolutionary. And who was this starlet from Shanghai coming to take her place?
Jiang Qing, a former actress on the other hand, was seen as the wrong kind of person to support their chairman.
很多人坚决反对江青呢，曾经在上海桃色新闻甚多。这样的女人呢，不适合于作为毛泽东夫人。
Mao's wife was so upset when she found out about his affair with Jiang Qing that she chased Mao with a knife. Then, 8 months pregnant in 1939, Jiang Qing strolled uninvited into a party meeting and loudly announced, "Chairman Mao and I have started living together." Meanwhile, Mao told his colleagues that without her love, he couldn't go on with the revolution. In spite of the Communist Party's reservations, an agreement was eventually reached, some say with the intervention of the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin. Mao got his divorce, and Jiang Qing became Mao's 4th wife.
当时的江青是24岁，已经嫁过4个丈夫了。这个毛泽东呢，45岁。
Jiang Qing's victory, however, came at a price.
In Yan'an, Jiang Qing learned that there were rules about women and the Communist Party. One was that women were to serve men, and the other was that the Communist Party was to decide all basic questions.
She was ordered to devote all her energies to looking after Mao. More importantly, she was not to appear in public as Mao's escort, nor engage in any political activity for 20 years. For the time being, marrying Mao, the Communist Party's leader, fulfilled Jiang Qing's ambitions.
from 1949 right on up to the early 1960s. If you comb through the newspapers looking for photos of Mao greeting someone at the airport, a returning leader or something, you know, in many countries you'd see the wife of the president or the chairman in the entourage. You never see pictures of Jiang Qing. That was apparently one of the conditions. No pictures of Jiang Qing. No publicity for her. And so here's another person who is tremendously frustrated, who's very, very ambitious in many ways, has many things that she wants to do.
Soon, Jiang Qing breathed new life into the communist village. Ever since Jiang Qing, the movie star, married Chairman Mao, noted a report in 1943, the formerly monotonous life of the communist bastion has changed immensely. The Observer explained that bourgeois dancing and Hollywood love songs have all flowed into Yan'an. But even then, during the weekly barn dance, Jiang Qing never danced with her husband, pairing him up instead with other good-looking women and nurses. Even in her new marriage, Jiang Qing had to do her best to deal with Mao's philandering ways. It was only the beginning of their strange and interesting relationship. In Yan'an, Jiang Qing proved to be a model mother and wife to Mao. Their only daughter, Li Na, was born in 1940. Within a few years of her marriage, however, Jiang Qing became bolder and steadily grew out of her famous husband's shadow.
因为在毛泽东身边，他当然会看到那么多党政要员来来去去，看到毛泽东在各种各样的大的场合那么多发表演说，挥手指挥这个百万雄师啊，他当然会对这种权力产生一种追求的欲望。
She did show a certain forcefulness, especially after the birth of her daughter. She was no longer Mao's girlfriend, but now she was Mao's wife, and this gave her a bit more confidence.
江青这个性格就是非常倔强，他本来从来没有骑过马，所以他第一次去骑马的时候，那个马很难驯服，他就越是这样呢，他非要驯服这个马不可。 所以他后来就成为很好的骑手，所以在延安看见一个女的骑着一匹马在大街上哗一下子过去，人家知道哦，江青来了。
Jiang Qing couldn't escape from the political atmosphere that surrounded her. Inevitably, as Mao's assistant, she became more and more interested and involved in his work. In 1945, Japanese aggression came to an end, but peace had not come to China, nor Jiang Qing. She followed her husband through a civil war as communist troops fought the nationalists for control of the country. The war took its toll on Jiang Qing's health, and in April 1949, she took a train to Moscow for treatment in a Russian hospital. Six months later, when Mao proclaimed the People's Republic of China in Tiananmen Square, Jiang Qing was still in Moscow, alone. When Jiang Qing finally returned, she lived with Mao, not in an austere abode that the Communist Party advocated for everyone else, but in a splendid pavilion within the Forbidden City in Beijing. The authorities had now given them separate living quarters. This separation described their relationship as well. The romance in the marriage was ebbing. Mao's duties of running the country had now taken over his life, and gone were the days of intimacy between Mao and Jiang Qing as leader and personal helper. Jiang Qing became increasingly restless. Playing the good wife and sitting on the sidelines was too insignificant a role.
She tried all sorts of things. She said, look, let me participate in land reform. There was this big land reform movement in the early 50s to dispossess the big landlords and divide up the land. So they didn't want her. How do you handle Mao's wife out in the countryside? Well, she insisted. So there she was, and she'd wear a fur coat. She was a very stylish woman. There were the landlords in their silk. They were being accused and executed. I mean, just imagine a woman from Beijing and these serious land reform sessions. So it was awkward.
Things weren't any better at home with her stepchildren. Mao was now giving more attention to his children from previous marriages, another sign of the widening gulf between them.
So the question became what to do with her. She couldn't be appointed to a job because of the marriage contract, but she was known as Mao Zedong's wife, and there was a certain implicit power or influence that attached to that. So she was a hot potato.
In 1950, the movies would take center stage once more in Jiang Qing's life. With the help of Chinese premier Zhou Enlai, she was appointed to the ministry's film committee to evaluate all movie projects. Culture was a vital propaganda tool to further China's communist cause. And as a former artiste herself, Jiang Qing regarded culture as her forte. She now denounced celebrated artists and films as being bourgeois and imperialistic. In passing judgment, Jiang Qing would make up for lost time as an actress and assert herself as the First Lady of China. Jiang Qing's opinions perplexed the other ministers, who didn't know how to deal with the flood of comments from Mao's wife. In 1952, the Communist Party had all of Jiang Qing's official posts removed. They reminded her once more that as Chairman Mao's wife, she had sworn to avoid all political activity for 20 years. The second half of the 50s was a difficult time for Jiang Qing. Her world seemed to be falling apart. She was diagnosed with life-threatening cervical cancer and repeatedly returned to Moscow for cobalt treatment. During her medical exile, Mao hardly visited.
江青以前在党内是受压的，因为毛主席不要给他出头露面。
Her daughter, then 18 and soon to enroll in university, often treated her as a stranger when she returned to Beijing. With her husband continuing to humiliate her by taking other women to bed, Jiang Qing unleashed her frustration on those around her.
So Jiang Qing had to face the fact whether she would put up with this or whether she would leave. There was no choice. She had nowhere to go. Beijing was the last stop for her, and for better or for worse, she was locked into this marriage with Mao Zedong.
One major event would soon turn Jiang Qing's life around. In 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, a plan to forcibly industrialize and modernize China's economy. It was a colossal failure that led to starvation and millions of deaths. Mao took responsibility for the disaster and stepped down as China's leader. Mao's second-in-command, Liu Shaoqi, would now head China, while his wife, Wang Guangmei, replaced Jiang Qing as First Lady. While friendly, Jiang Qing's jealousy would eventually rear its ugly head. Despite being Mao's wife, the Communist Party had managed to keep Jiang Qing anonymous and hidden from the public eye throughout the years as part of her marriage agreement.
In 1962, the wife of President Sukarno of Indonesia arrived in China, and Liu Shaoqi, the number 2 man, handled much of the visit. And the next day there were even pictures of Liu Shaoqi's wife and Madame Sukarno together. Jiang Qing was furious that the wife of the number 2 man was photographed with Madame Sukarno. Why can't Jiang Qing, as the wife of Mao, be photographed? Lo and behold, 5 days later, here's a picture of Mao, Jiang Qing, and Madame Sukarno, the 2 ladies with Mao. This was the first time in the history of the PRC that a photo of Mao and Jiang Qing together was published in China.
Suddenly, there was a Jiang Qing, and the people start to know she was Mao's wife, and that was a pretty big shock to us, because for many years we even didn't know who was Chairman Mao's wife.
The 1960s saw Jiang Qing taking on a new agenda and a new look, transforming herself from a regular civilian into a military revolutionary.
老百姓根本不能看到江青的，一般的人，我们调到北京，江青看我们的时候，我们才看到江青。当时他穿军装，感觉他是保养的比较好的人，就皮肤啊很白。他喜欢戴黑眼镜，他说他怕光。 我们知道他的名字，他的威严在，他说话的分量在。
By 1965, Mao and Jiang Qing plotted his return to power. Mao believed that the government had strayed from the left-wing communist ideals he had helped to build. He now needed Jiang Qing's help to launch his final revolution and wipe out anyone who stood in his way. As his staunchest ally, Jiang Qing now took the political spotlight for the first time.
江青到处都说：“我代表毛主席来看望你们啦！”这个对他来说，这毛泽东父女这是他手中的一张王牌。
Acting as Mao's mouthpiece, it was now time for Jiang Qing to start her own revolution as well. She declared that people were not true communists if they still enjoyed the old forms of opera, theater, music, and film.
Jiang Qing saw that her opportunity now had come to realize her own very radical views on constructing a new socialist culture and was stepping forward to claim Mao's policies to control Chinese culture.
Beginning in 1962, Jiang Qing did away with all traditional plays and operas. Instead, she created new operas as models for revolutionaries to follow. It would be the launching pad for her political career. The press called her plays Yang Banxi, or revolutionary model pieces.
Jiang Qing, because she had complete control over the entire cultural field in China, she could commission the best singers, the best orchestra, the best screenwriters for her purposes.
She'd dress up the heroes in extra beautiful costumes, and she'd make the villains very villainous. So in this way, she tried to polarize the theatre. There'd be good and bad. There'd be darkness and there'd be light. There'd be capitalism and there'd be socialism.
In the model operas, there were no reference to love. No husband and wife, no lovers, no kisses, no hugs.
But while condemning all forms of Western culture, Madam Mao still enjoyed her favorite Hollywood movies in secret.
她可以通过电影发行公司从国外进口一些，包括好莱坞的影片。
江青，他给我们看了很多外国的电影，他给我们看，叫我们带着批判的眼光去看，就是你看了不能全盘接收，你要对里面的不好的对批评。
江青啊，他的性格来讲是有一种裂变。你在这个公众场合上高唱反封自修的高调，私下里又是那么骨子里有那么样的喜欢这个西方的那个艺术，这对他来讲是一个矛盾。
Meanwhile, Jiang Qing's operas continued to cause an uproar both among the public and the communist elite.
Deng said after a week working, people want to go to the theatre to relax. With Jiang Qing's pieces, all you see is people rushing around the stage. It's like a battlefield.
Jiang Qing's artistic impulses would soon be forced upon every Chinese.
The problem with the model plays is that they created a monoculture, and people got bored quickly of these things.
Jiang Qing's critics, however, would soon feel her wrath, and her rapid ascent would shake the country to the core. In 1966, Mao Zedong declared that the Cultural Revolution was in effect. All existing institutions had to be destroyed for the good of communism. The result was total chaos. Leading this offensive was Jiang Qing, now the most powerful woman in China. Despite having no political experience, she became Mao's deputy director of the Central Cultural Revolution Group.
他要文化艺术出头露面，给毛主席看看，我有能量，好出风头。
Sex is engaging in the first rounds, but what sustains interest in the long run is power. Jiang Qing's infamous line would one day resonate around the world. With total control over Chinese culture, Jiang Qing had finally found the adulation she so craved from a young age.
As she looked out over the Red Guards, I think she was becoming an actress again. She wasn't a very serious communist. She never studied communist doctrine. I think communism for her did mean power.
At the front line of the revolution were the Red Guards. Encouraged by Mao and directly instigated by Jiang Qing, the Red Guards formed vigilante mobs that terrorized China. Still, many question Jiang Qing's legitimacy as a true communist.
江青很招摇，跟他那个上面挥动的语录很活跃的，像这些东西大家都看在眼里，恨在心中，嘴上不敢说。
Now the role model for the revolution, Jiang Qing became paranoid that her bourgeois past would return to haunt her.
其实很多人知道江青的底细，尤其是上海人都知道他当年在30年代的那些事情，但是这种话谁都不敢说。如果你说一两句不敬的话，你马上就会成为现行犯，把你被关进监狱里头。
At times, Jiang Qing made use of the madness for her own ends. Hiring people and disguising them as Red Guards, she ransacked homes in an effort to locate and destroy any material revealing her colorful past in Shanghai. The one-time actress now had an audience of the entire country, as she banned books, films, and plays, and ruined the careers of thousands of officials and artists in the name of Mao.
你不管在哪一个领域的比较有名的作家、艺术家，都绝大部分都遭到批判、遭到批斗或者关进监狱。
Jiang Qing's Cultural Revolution tolerated no dissent. No one could question her or Mao. Denounced, arrested, and then publicly humiliated at mass rallies, many were forced to confess to mostly imaginary crimes.
这种例子在文化大革命很普通的。我自己就是有2个，我的阿姨也是，我的姨父被斗，我的外婆，现在回想起来很害怕。
江青，我曾经称她是一个复仇的女人，女神。她这个人心眼儿小，她会一件小事或者一句话，多少年以前的事情，她是都记得的。到那个她有大权的时候，她要一一报复。
Among Jiang Qing's prime targets was China's First Lady, Wang Guangmei. Having stolen the limelight from Jiang Qing, she would now pay for it. Wang once donned a tight-fitting Chinese dress to meet the Indonesian President Sukarno. The Red Guards forced her to don the same dress with silk stockings, high heels, and a garish necklace made out of ping-pong balls engraved with skulls. Wang would go on to spend 12 long years in prison, while her husband died in captivity. Finally, the Cultural Revolution had become so destructive that Mao called for an end. But irreparable damage had been done. Hundreds of thousands had been killed or imprisoned. Millions had suffered. Yet, in spite of the chaos, Jiang Qing ended the decade on top, more prominent than ever before. In 1969, Jiang Qing was made the first ever woman member of the Politburo, China's elite ruling group. But even this wasn't enough for her. To advance her interests, Jiang Qing gathered her allies, fellow Politburo members Jiang Chunqiao, Wang Hongwen, and literary critic Yao Wenyan. Collectively, they would later be known as the Gang of Four and became highly influential. Despite regaining his leadership, it was apparent that at the age of 77, Mao would not stay in power forever. Though it seemed inconceivable to most, Jiang Qing saw herself as Mao's likely successor. With Mao's death a matter of time, Jiang Qing felt that she, who had been at Mao's side for 40 years, deserved to be his proper heir.
She thought she could be the interpreter of Mao thought, even with Mao gone. And I think she really didn't know, secluded in Beijing, how deeply, deeply unpopular the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution were among the Chinese people.
When U.S. President Nixon's visit in 1972 reopened Sino-American relations, Jiang Qing entertained Nixon and the First Lady with a performance of A Red Detachment of Women. When Nixon asked who had inspired the play, she informed him graciously that it was created by the masses. Later that year, without Mao's knowledge, Jiang Qing invited an American scholar named Roxanne Whitkey to document her life story. The 60 hours of interview transcripts were later collected in an unauthorized biography.
Jiang Qing probably thought that as a future leader of China, she'd get an American to tell her story. So she entertained Miss Whitkey for a number of long interviews, and she showed off in a big way. Miss Whitkey produced a book that Jiang Qing must have been pleased about. But Mao was not pleased about her doing this, and he didn't want this degree of self-promotion.
In 1974, Jiang Qing turned her attention to fashion. With Imelda Marcos visiting, Jiang Qing ordered the country to create a unique national dress for Chinese women. The feminine Jiang Qing dress was inspired by the Tang Dynasty and worn by Chinese female delegates. The dress, however, was a fashion flop, as women found it too expensive and too hard to wear. Mao did nothing to discourage his wife's bid for power, but cautioned her against overstepping her authority. Even though the marriage between Jiang Qing and Mao was distant, he was still her main benefactor.
By 1974, Mao wrote to her and said, "It's better if we don't see each other." Mao now had a mistress who had been a train conductor.
More important to Jiang Qing than Mao's love was his support to her eventual bid to rule China. But Mao was typically enigmatic.
Mao was careful to balance the different factions against each other. He would not allow any one faction the single dominance. So yes, Jiang Qing had Mao's support at certain times in certain issues, but in other times, Mao would give preference to other factions. So she had to compete for Mao's support.
By now, Mao had brought back Jiang Qing's rival, Deng Xiaoping, to help run the government. The arch-enemies had no love lost for one another. Jiang Qing called Deng a fascist dwarf, while he called her a vicious woman, too vicious for words. Then, Jiang Qing's former ally, Premier Zhou Enlai, died in January 1976. A pioneering communist, his death was mourned by everyone in the nation, except Jiang Qing.
江青呢，把周恩来看作眼中钉。周恩来去世，江青非常高兴。
Even in death, Jiang Qing tolerated no competition. She now saw Zhou's legacy as a threat to her power. At Tiananmen Square, Jiang Qing attempted to stop a public memorial for Zhou. It was the biggest mistake of her life. With thousands paying their respects to the late premier, the memorial quickly turned into a mass protest attacking Jiang Qing.
Jiang Qing was facing a dilemma. She could not sit by and watch on as people were protesting against her, so she had to crack down and end this movement. On the other hand, doing so clearly made many people angry. Jiang Qing was in a lose-lose situation.
As Mao's health declined, Jiang Qing's star continued to rise. She was one of the most powerful figures in China during Mao's last years. With Mao Zedong's death in 1976, much of Jiang Qing's aura and armor was stripped away. What would happen to Jiang Qing once Mao, her protector and ally, had gone? Mao Zedong's death on September 9, 1976, sent shockwaves through the country.
Jiang Qing was a nervous wreck. When Mao died, her forces and the opposing forces were scouring around looking for documents. Had Mao left a piece of paper that handed the future to them? Several weeks of extraordinary uncertainty began.
Jiang Qing strove to move troops into position to show that she was Mao's chosen successor. But by this time, her personal vendettas had angered too many people, including her nemesis, Deng Xiaoping, the man who would one day rule China. The Communist Party and China were not prepared to have a woman succeed Mao, and least of all, Jiang Qing.
Jiang Qing didn't have an organization. Jiang Qing would make gestures like telling of her life to Miss Whitkey, gestures like escorting Imelda Marcos around China. But this is not the same thing as counting the numbers and preparing for a constituency that would back you. And her opponents did just that.
As the two rival factions squared off against each other, the only question was who would strike first.
Now that Mao was no longer around to keep a proper balance, the only choice she had was to make the grab for power. And eventually it turned out to be that this grab was unsuccessful, and the very effort to grab for power was the direct cause of her downfall then.
On October 6, 1976, Jiang Qing went to a park in Beijing to pluck apples, blissfully unaware of what was about to befall her. That same evening, less than a month after Mao's death, Jiang Qing was arrested, along with the 3 other members of the Gang of 4. In one swift stroke, Jiang Qing's dream of ruling China was shattered.
There was a terrible irony about Jiang Qing falling. A month after Mao's death, she'd had her great moments in the Cultural Revolution, but after Mao's death, it was as if she, after all, was just an appendage to a man.
People around China celebrated when they heard the news. With Jiang Qing's arrest, the Cultural Revolution was finally over.
当然对这个事情就大快人心，是粉碎四人帮啊！我平生第一次喝醉酒就是江青被逮捕了，四人帮垮台了，这反映了人们的一种心声吧。
She was vilified in exactly the same way that the enemies of Mao were vilified at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. Propaganda art, posters, caricatures, cartoon made her out to be a monster-like figure. And so this was done. Why was this done? In order to deflect the attention away from Mao, because everybody knew that he was the one responsible for the Cultural Revolution.
A nickname emerged for Madame Mao at this time, the white-boned demon.
Now, in Chinese tradition, a white-boned demon came to stand for a female that led a male astray. It's an irresistible way of saying what was wrong with her.
Jiang Qing was now a political prisoner. Never could she have imagined she would be condemned to the same place she had once sent her enemies. Finally, she was told she would appear in court to answer for the crimes she committed during the Cultural Revolution, crimes that included plotting to overthrow the government. For 4 years, Jiang Qing had languished in disgrace. Now the chance had come for her to reclaim the stage. The reigning political powers must have thought it would be Jiang Qing's darkest hour. But she would end up stealing the show.
当时的感觉就是演员本色，他在那个审判的时候站在被告席上，还不忘他的演员本色，他还在演戏，他表情非常丰富。
Despite the severity of the accusations against her, Jiang Qing was fearless and unrepentant. Before 35 judges and 600 onlookers, she defiantly expressed a total denial of any guilt.
毛泽东主席的妻子38年整了，认识还不止，共患难了。战争的时候，唯一留在前方追随毛泽东主席的，只有我一个女同志。你们躲到哪儿去了？
She lost her temper and she'd said, "Can I ask a few questions? You're asking me a lot of questions." And they would say, "Shut up, Jiang Qing." And then she'd curse at the judges. It was really quite amazing because she would cause pandemonium in the court.
那种倔强啊，那种顽抗啊，那种东西我们是第一次看到，所以我们很震惊的，就看到了性格的另外一方面。
Jiang Qing claimed that she had only been carrying out Mao's orders. She shouted, "I was Chairman Mao's dog. I bit whoever he told me to bite." It took nearly a month for the judges to agree on a verdict. Jiang Qing was found guilty on all counts. For this, she was given the death sentence, which would be suspended for 2 years.
一听到这个，他就立即非常的激动，当时已经做好准备了，所以他一开口马上把她嫁出去了，就这样的，从观众的这个那么多千千万的电视观众的视线当中消失了。
Jiang Qing spent the next decade in prison and eventually house arrest. The looming threat of execution never materialized, even after 2 years. Some felt that putting Chairman Mao's wife to death would be too controversial. Time and time again, she attempted to write her memoirs, but the prison guards would destroy anything she wrote.
她晚年呢，就是得了癌症，所以她也很痛苦。 他已经觉得没有任何希望再出来了，也没有希望再出去，也没有这个中国已经是那样一个中国。
In 1991, after her nurse had left for the night, Jiang Qing fashioned a noose from several handkerchiefs, tied it to the iron frame above her bathtub, and hanged herself. She was 77 years old.
江青自杀的时候说的，在那个报纸的边缘上，他写了一句话，就是“主席，我爱你，你的学生、战友要来看你了。”
While her husband's body lay in a mausoleum, Madam Mao was buried without ceremony in a public cemetery. The Chinese government subsequently had all images of Jiang Qing removed from official photographs, almost denying her political existence.
I'm no fan of Jiang Qing, so I'm not here to sympathize with Jiang Qing. A very, very destructive person, caused misery for many people. However, I hate to say this, but she's a scapegoated and tragic figure in her own way.
Many critics now agree that Jiang Qing took most of the blame for what were Mao's mistakes. In the end, however, while Mao's legacy remained untouchable for the Chinese, Jiang Qing died branded as a dictator. Nonetheless, some see her as a tragic figure who survived alone in a male-dominated communist regime.
Meanwhile, the generations pass also culturally. There are many people in China today who find it fascinating that she was as willful as she was. Remember, individualism is on the march in China. Who knows what's in the mind of young females who may look back and ask how she could do as much as she did.